most etchings are done on either zinc or copper. Traditionally speaking, zinc is probably the most widely used metal, primarily because of its cost. It's fairly reasonable. Copper, on the other hand, costs about 3 times what zinc does, but it will give you a much finer quality print. So I've been using using copper for several years, and found that I get a much more delicate, more controlled etch. What I'm going to do first is to take a clean copper plate and apply an etching ground to it. And it sort of looks like plain old black paint. You have to try to get a fairly even coat on the plate. What this does is protect the plate. If you take this plate after the ground has dried and drop it in acid, nothing will happen because this ground is protecting the plate. Now, I'll have to let that dry so that it'll be fairly smooth. You'll notice it's fairly dark. I have another plate over here that's already dry, so I'll switch over to it. This one is dry. And what the artist does at this point is to draw his image through the ground. Now, when I draw onto this plate, all I'm doing is exposing the metal through the ground. I'm not digging into the metal. I'm just simply scraping away the ground. Also on the plate, when you're drawing, the plate is black. And when you draw and expose the metal is light in color, the color of copper. So when you're drawing, you get a light line on a dark surface. But after you print the print, it's reversed. Those light lines that were on the plate print dark on the paper. The other thing is, whatever I put on this plate, when it's printed, is going to print in reverse. So if I write my name on here, it'll print backwards. So everything I draw here has to be drawn backwards if I want it to print out in the correct manner. So any lettering or of that nature would have to be done backwards. So an artist has to really work out his composition ahead of time and keep that in mind, that it's going to be a mirror image when it is printed. Now after I get my image drawn on here, I take this plate and drop it in iron perchloride, which is the acid that most artists use for etching copper. It's a fairly safe acid, and it's replaced some of the older acids that used to be so bad for you to breathe. The plate would stay in the acid hour to hour and a half, and it gets down and just literally eats out those lines that have been exposed, and all these other areas remain virgin plate. After it's etched for a while, you take it out and wash all the ground off, and you end up with a plate that looks very much like this. The image is eaten out down into the copper. And of course, even an experienced printmaker has a difficult time looking at this plate and knowing what it's going to look like. So most artists will run a proof, what we call states. It'd be state number 1 to see what the image is like. Now with this plate, after I did the first line etch, which is just line only, I proofed it, and this let me see how the print looked with just a line. Well, I wanted to develop it more. I wanted to have dark and light areas, and I'll introduce color also. So at that point, I go back and work on the plate again, and then when I get ready, I'll proof it a second time. And here I've introduced some real heavy darks. Now these darks are too dark. but I did that on purpose. And I'm going to show you on this plate why. Anything you do to change the surface of this copper will create some sort of effect. You could beat it with a hammer, or hit it with a chain, or rub it with sandpaper. Anything that changes or roughens up the surface will hold ink and create an effect. And on the second hand, these areas that have not been touched, that have been covered with ground, are perfectly smooth, and when you ink up the plate, it won't hold any ink. Now, I have etched, as I mentioned in this study, I've etched in some real dark areas. If you can imagine looking at this plate microscopically, you have all these little deep pits down in there. And the deeper those little pits and valleys are, the more ink will get out in there when I ink it up. So if they're real deep, it holds a lot of ink and prints dark. If I want it to print a medium value, then I can't afford to have those pits too deep. So I need to make them shallow. Well, there's no way I can fill them in with anything, so I have to literally scrape the metal to get it down so that those pits are shallow. And the more shallow they are, the less ink they hold. Consequently, the lighter the print will print. This is called a spot proof. What I've done, if you'll look in here, I've gone in and on the plate I've scraped away the metal and taken this tool, which is called a scraper, and literally dug the metal away. I took this, which is just a simple burnisher, and burnished the metal down so that it would be smooth. Inked it up and printed it, and you can see in the shoes and in the birds how it is lightened up. So I'm really modeling the images, bringing them from a dark up to a light. Now, in most cases, a print this size, of this complexity, would be proofed 10 to 12 or more times in order to get a final image. And each time you see that it changes slightly.